recording.
You're recording? I should probably talk. Today we're going to talk about a bike that I have ridden up a hill. Are you pointing at the bike or me? This one. So today's video is talking about Cervélo's R5, how this bike has been reinvented from the previous generation and why this could be the ultimate bike for you as an all-round bike. Now, disclaimer, I am sponsored by Shimano and I am sponsored by Cervélo, so please bear that in mind when I'm talking about it. The R5 range from Cervélo has existed for quite a long time. The previous generation R5 came out in 2016, and the previous generation 2016 R5 was rated so highly as a super lightweight bike that handles incredibly well. Now, Cervélo decided to redesign the R5, but it wasn't going to be a massive redesign. It was going to be more of a case of updating it and some slight tweaks. They basically wanted to improve a certain few things, such as making the frame and the bike more aerodynamic, integrating the cables much more, which also helps with the aerodynamic side of it. Importantly, they wanted to keep the same sort of weights and keep the same sort of stiffness profile with the bike itself. But one of the big feedbacks that came back from the 2016 R5, that it's actually quite stiff. So changing the stiffness profile to make it more comfortable for a lighter weight rider who would, say, be doing a Grand Tour and trying to win those kind of races. 2016 model of the R5 spanned across 3 different World Tour teams: Dimension Data, Sunweb, Jumbo-Visma. The reason why these particular 3 teams, it was to make sure that they had both a men's and a women's team. So with Dimension Data, the women's team was Cervélo Bigla, Sunweb had a men's and a women's team, and Jumbo-Visma had a men's and a women's team. So they could get a good understanding of how the bike was for different sized athletes, small, medium and large. Being able to test the bike with World Tour riders means that these bikes get used in Grand Tours, doing thousands and thousands of kilometers over, several weeks. And really you get an understanding of how the bike handles, how it climbs, how it descends, how it feels as well after riding it in the saddle for multiple days. The current generation R5 was first teased at La Flèche Wallonne. It's a really hard thing to say if you're English. So the current generation R5 was first teased in April 2021 under Primoz from Jumbo-Visma at La Flèche Wallonne. The bike was just put out there. Nothing was said publicly that a new one was coming. The special thing is that that bike that was teased at Flèche Wallonne was that bike that's behind us in that colorway. Cervélo produced a very limited amount of R5s in this colorway, which were given to the riders, and I very luckily managed to get my hands on one as well. This particular frame set is designed to be the lightest iteration that they possibly could make for the R5. The paint job is effectively not there. Pretty much raw carbon with a water transfer and then a clear coat over the top to protect the carbon underneath it. So they've made this bike as light as they possibly could. When you're creating a super lightweight bike, obviously one of the big drivers is chasing weight on trying to make a bike really, really lightweight. Cervélo know how to make really lightweight bikes. We've seen that previously with the RCA and the Project California bikes. So the main goals that came on this bike was to make sure that the ride quality and the stability were really, really good. Make sure it was comfortable to ride and also comfortable to descend on at crazy, crazy speeds. You can't win a Grand Tour just uphill. You need to be able to descend really well. You need to be able to ride multiple days in and out. And that was the goal, was to make this bike the ultimate Grand Tour bike. They wanted to make sure the handling stayed the same as the previous generation R5 because that bike won awards for how it handled and how it descended. That was really important to keep that. Jumbo-Visma actually turned around to Cervélo and said, don't change the geometry. The bike itself is perfect. We just want improvements on the weight and the comfort on the bike itself. Cervélo have designed their own tube profiles, which are used across the range of bikes, called Schwalbe tubing. The latest tubes, which are used on the newest R5, are called Schwalbe Max. So it's basically a way of changing the strengthening points on the bike. Robert Hessing was riding on one of the new R5s and he lost one of the rear stays and carried on riding. He didn't actually notice that the rear stay had broken off in a crash. Amazing to show the strength of that bike, but to show that actually losing that rear stay didn't affect the handling or the comfort really shows the success of that bike. So when developing these new Schwalbe Max tubes, Cervélo made a point of changing and tweaking where the load on the bike was carried in the tubes. They wanted to make sure that most of the load was carried down the spine of the bike being the down tube and the seat stays for the bike. By doing this, you're supporting the headset of the bike, the front of the bike, the bottom bracket, so the center of the bike, which is your power transfer point, and also the rear wheel of the bike, which is where all your power then goes to from the drive. They do understand that the top tube is a super critical part of the bike still, but this is much more about torsional stiffness as opposed to that kind of like load stiffness. Torsional stiffness is to do with the twisting, load stiffness is to do with power and pushing down on power. So there was a very defined list of what this 2022 Cervélo R5 was supposed to be as a bike. And now this list was generated from Jumbo-Visma and their development team and the riders at Jumbo-Visma. But also as a team, they were very lucky that a large proportion of riders who raced for Sunweb when they were sponsored by Cervélo moved over from that team over to Jumbo-Visma. So they had a great pool of resource and knowledge of riders who'd tested these bikes for a very long time, which was highly, highly valuable for the brand. The goals for this bike were to keep the handling the same, to keep the fit the same, to try and aim for a sub 1 kilo frame set in a size 56 with all the bolts and stuff on it as well, to make sure that the bike was stiff enough for pro riders, but also to improve the comfort, to make sure that this bike was comfortable to race a Grand Tour. And what I mean by that is the vibration management. The final overarching goal from Jumbo-Visma was to develop the ultimate Grand Tour bike. This is a bike that needs to be able to climb really well, descend really well, sprint really well, allow you to recover on it. So that's where we talk about the vibration management, and then be able to repeat it day in, day out, continually for 3 weeks. The one additional Easter egg that they wanted to try and achieve with this bike was to bring the R5 back into the ultralight category, as well as having no compromises to the handling, the comfort, the steering, the strength, and making sure you can still sprint on that bike ultimately, which is a lot to try and bring into one bike. So let's talk about the frame performances and some of the changes they've made on that bike. In a size 56 frame with the forks and parts. So when I say parts, I'm talking like bolts for bottle cages, mech hangers, all that kind of stuff. They managed to get the frame 160 grams lighter in a size 56. This is 15% lighter as a frame weight and 7% lighter in the forks. So 15% is a substantial saving on a frame. So to give you some numbers to kind of compare the weights, the 2016 version of the R5, the frame weight in a size 56 was 831 grams and the fork weight was 356 grams. Now the new R5, the frame weight in a 56 is 700 grams and the fork weight is 330 grams. So it's quite a significant saving in weight. The frame stiffness for this model was optimized for comfort and reduced weight. The fork stiffness was changed, so it was optimized for improved stability and braking. This bike is only available as a disc brake model. It brakes so much better. You have way more control in your braking, especially in worse conditions. And the other side of it with disc brakes that I personally really like is you don't wear out your wheels. You're wearing out brake pads and a rotor. It's a lot cheaper than buying a whole new wheel. So side by side, if you were to look at the 2016 R5 and the 2022 R5 model, they don't look that different until you start to get into the details of it. And you can only really see that when you overlay them next to each other or were to look at the bikes next to each other. So with the newer bike, some of the big aesthetic improvements are more about starting to incorporate the aerodynamic side of it. We're seeing climbing bikes now really bringing in those aero gains to try and make them marginally faster than their previous iterations. We've seen this from other brands. So with the new bike, Cervélo lowered the seat tube and the down tube, and they also incorporated this chin into the fork. There's a couple of reasons why they incorporated this chin. Ultimately, it helps with aerodynamics by integrating it into the frame and the down tube better. It helps with tire clearance, allowing you to fit a much larger tire onto the bike. Fundamentally, aesthetically, it just looks nicer. Fundamentally, I didn't even say that right. Nicer, what's a nicer? Fundamentally, aesthetically, it looks nicer. Nicer. And there's no weight penalty. There is an aero gain. There's no weight penalty to that. In words. Ooh. Lowering the top tube on this bike allows for a better standover height, so for smaller riders it's ultimately easier to get onto the bike. Lowering the top tube also means there's a reduced mass at the seat tube, which also helps with comfort, vibration, seat post flex, that kind of thing as well. One of the things that I like that Cervélo have done is they've got rid of the kind of external, it's not an external seat post clamp, but there's a clamp that kind of sat above on the previous generation R5. On this one, really, really clean. There's nice and neat. Just looks really smooth, swooshy. By lowering the top tube and also lowering the seat stays slightly, this helps, as I've already said, with vibration management, and by exposing more of your seat post, which allows you to have additional movement and flex in that seat post, which helps with comfort ultimately. All these things are done is to help the bike feel more comfortable over multiple day riding. So these very, very tiny tweaks in the geometry have helped improve the stability at speed. And additional things that they've done, for example, is also dropping the bottom bracket very, very slightly. The trail on this bike is 57.5mm, and that is based on a 28mm tire. If you were to put, say, a 25mm tire on it, that will take the trail back to 57mm. I know it's half a mil, but that does actually make a difference to how the bike rides and handles. Where's this guy going? Hey, Ben. Hey, come on. Fly, man. Fly off. I'm vegetarian, I do not kill flies, but leave. Leave. Can't get the staff. The chain stays on this bike are relatively short, 410mm. That helps with the handling and makes it, quite racy as a bike. It helps it with getting it around corners and helping with power transfer, stiffness, that kind of thing. Fly's still here. I can hear it in my ear. As I've already said, the actual stack and reach of the bike has not changed at all. That was a really big insistence from Jumbo-Visma and Sunweb as well before. So there's very, very subtle differences between the different sizes in terms of the geometry, but the big thing that was really important was to make sure that everyone rode the same and felt the same and felt fantastic to descend and climb on. Really important thing that I have not mentioned yet on the aerodynamic side that Cervélo found very surprising when developing this bike. And a huge amount of this saving has come from things like the aero chin on the fork and integrating the cables and slightly tweaking and changing the tubing from the Schwalbe tubing to the Schwalbe Max tubing. When they tested the new R5 in the wind tunnel, they found that the bike saved 2.5 watts. 2.5 watts is a substantial saving. Things are so highly tuned and designed. Normally it's half a watt here, half a watt there, not much at all. And they actually found the greatest saving, which could be up to 5 or 6 watts, is at a yaw degree angle of plus and minus 10 to 15 degrees. Generally speaking, anything underneath that 10-degree angle, 2.5 watts. There's been a few additional updates in terms of finishing kit stuff provided with the R5. Very, very subtle ones, but worth noting and talking about. To start with, they have integrated all the cabling into the frame, which you can see on the Aspero 5, the Caledonia 5, and there are ways that you can make it work as well on the Soloist, which I've done using a special top cap. The steerer itself is a D-shaped steerer, which allows the cabling to go into the front of the steerer and then down into the frame appropriately. But this integrated top cap is available in 3 different sizes. So you can have it everything from being slammed all the way up to a 52mm worth of spacers underneath the stem. So you've got such a variety in terms of the fit height that you can do there. The frame itself is designed so you can fit up to a 34mm tire, which will allow you to have 10mm of clearance around that tire. But Cervélo have designed this bike based around using the reserve wheels that they sell the bike with if you were to buy a complete bike. Tires set up tubeless. I believe these ones are 28s, and there's tons of clearance around the bike to be able to fit much bigger tires on if I wanted to. Boop. Finger width. Boop. Finger width. I can't reach down there. More than a finger width. Oh. The last things to mention that have been updated with this bike, HB13 handlebars. The new handlebars that come with the R5 are slight updates from the previous iterations. Basically, they're slightly lighter, and the cable integration is no longer fully internal into the handlebar. It actually runs into a recessed channel underneath the handlebar, which makes servicing and general maintenance much easier to get to the cables. And then the other update has been the seat post, the SP24 seat post. Cervélo are now offering this as a 0 offset seat post, a 15mm offset seat post, and a 25mm offset seat post. So you've got lots of flexibility in your fit. Mine has a 0 offset seat post because I think it looks pro as heck with a big stem. One of the things that was maybe a complaint in previous times from Cervélo about the R5 and some of the other bikes was that the compression bungs were glued into the steerers. With this D-shaped steerer now, the compression bung is actually one that you can remove. It's all screwed in and out, so that gives you quite a lot of flexibility as well of adjustment of fit. With the R5, it is available from a frame set, and available to purchase in all of the electronic group set options available from Shimano and SRAM. So to talk a bit about my experiences with the R5, I'm very lucky to have ridden this one and the previous version of the R5. When the Dimension Data colorway version came out, I remember seeing it and thinking there's no way in hell I'm ever going to be able to afford one of them. So I had a pot of money saving for years and eventually found a frame in New York, which I bought. I bought it from a bike shop called RNA Cycles in New York and flew it home. It was expensive. I will say that they both, in terms of the handling, are fantastic bikes. They both handle exceptionally well, descend fantastically well, climb incredibly well. But there's definitely a noticeable difference in the comfort side of it. I would say that I think that the previous generation feels much stiffer in the sense that it's less forgiving in its comfort. In terms of like power transfer, I think they feel quite similar. Now I used this version for the Severn Everest project, which was last year, riding up and down Stoyland Dam every day for a week. Now that is a 3.5 kilometer climb with switchbacks, sheep, not exactly great surfaces, but also quite steep parts on the climb itself. So if you think climbing and descending that over the course of a week, you are getting ridiculously fatigued and tired, and we had terrible, terrible weather for most of that challenge as well. The bike itself was faultlessly good. The only issues that we actually had was down to wear and tear, brake pads wearing out, rotors wearing out, tires wearing out. But the frame and the way it rode and handled, I couldn't fault it at all. I was so impressed with it as a bike overall. The way it descended round corners, even in the wet, was very confidence giving, and I didn't feel like I was actually really that slow descending. If anything, I probably got faster as I got more used to and more comfortable with the bike. In terms of how it climbed, it feels like it climbs really well, which is kind of hard to explain, but it just feels good going uphill. Personally, I love the shape of the handlebars. I find them really comfortable. They're a slightly aero profile top, the handlebars, which feels really nice to rest your hands on when you're riding. And they also feel great on the drops if you want to sprint and have a little dig on them as well. I like how easy it is that you can still get access to all your cabling if you need to, as and when you might need to as well. I've also ridden this bike separate from doing that crazy challenge. Like I've taken it on holidays where I've gone and ridden it in Spain for a week with my mates, and we've just like taken chunks out of each other going up hills and found it really fun and enjoyable to ride. And it's been the bike that everyone kind of comments on how rad it looks, to be honest with you. So during the Everest, I had this bike built up with Dura-Ace 11 speed with an Ultegra rear mech. Now the reason for the Ultegra rear mech was because it allowed me to be able to put a larger cassette on the bike. Otherwise, the rest of the group set was Dura-Ace shifters, crankset, 170 crank with compact gears, and then 1134 I think I had on the back, or 1132, basically the biggest cassette I could fit on the back of it. I've subsequently changed that, so this bike now is built up with Ultegra Di2 12 speed, 170 crank, still with compact chain rings, and I don't actually know what size cassette, 30? Currently I've got this bike built up with Reserve 4044s, which is not Reserve's shallowest wheel that they make. The reason for that is because those wheels that I do have are currently being made very, 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 very light. The 40-44 combination gives you a bit of an aerodynamic gain, but more than anything, I think they look really nice. That depth on that kind of bike, it's not crazy, crazy slim, kind of aero-y, looks pretty pimp. In terms of my setup on this, as I said, I'm running an inline seat post, and I ride with a 130 stem with the 20mm top cap spacer thing, which I think looks really clean and neat, works really well. It's a really beautiful bike, maybe my favorite. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, please drop a comment on this video. And if I don't know the answer, I'll reach out to Cervélo and see if I can get an answer for you as well. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment. It's not champagne. Shot, 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 shots.